Today, we're diving into the really profound and honestly often overlooked parallels between two of the world's biggest faiths, Hinduism and Islam. We're looking at some material that makes a pretty bold case that underneath all their unique traditions, there's a deep, shared spiritual foundation. So let's jump in and see what it's all about.
All right, so at first glance, you'd think these two faiths are worlds apart, right? You've got Islam, which is strictly monotheistic, centered on the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran, and then you have Hinduism, which, as most people see it, is polytheistic, with this huge pantheon of deities and ancient texts like the Vedas. They really do look like two completely separate worlds. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the original texts, the actual sources, tell us something completely different? The material we're looking at suggests the story gets a whole lot more interesting when you do that. So the first big parallel we're going to look at gets right to the heart of it all, the idea of God. The argument here is that if you dig a little deeper past all the stuff you see on the surface, both faiths actually share a belief in one God. Okay, so in Islam, this idea has a name, Tawheed. And it's not just an idea, it's the core belief. We're talking about the absolute, indivisible oneness of God. A God who is totally unique, with no form, no equal. I mean, this is the foundation of everything in Islamic theology. Okay, now listen to this quote. He is one only without a second. Now, where do you think that's from? The Quran, right? Well, according to the material we're looking at, that line comes straight out of Hindu scripture. That is a pretty undeniable echo of monotheism, wouldn't you say? And here you can really see what we're talking about, side by side. On the left, you've got the Quran, saying things like, "There is nothing like unto him." Super clear, right? But then look at the right, at what the Vedas and Puranas say. Of that God, there is no image. It's a striking parallel. The big point the source is making is this. Forget popular practice for a second. If you go back to the original texts, the whole idea of a pantheon of gods, it kind of fades away. And what you're left with is this focus on one single formless creator. All right, so if that first point was interesting, this next one is, well, it's a real bombshell. The source we're examining makes the claim that the Prophet of Islam was actually prophesied in ancient Hindu texts. I mean, just think about that for a second. Could scriptures, written thousands of years ago in India, really contain detailed descriptions of a prophet who would one day appear in Arabia? It's a huge question. So the whole argument really hinges on passages like the one you see here. The source points to verses, specifically in texts like the Bhavishya Purana, that talk about a future teacher. They call him an illustrious one who's going to come from a foreign land to bring back righteousness. So how do the scholars cited in this material connect the dots? Well, they break it down into three key steps. First up, the name. They argue that a specific Sanskrit name in the prophecy is basically a direct translation of Muhammad. Second, the land. The text talks about this teacher coming from a sandy region to the west, which they say is, you guessed it, Arabia. And finally, the events. They actually connect specific events described in the prophecy to key moments in the prophet's own life, drawing a really detailed parallel. Okay, so we've talked theology, we've talked prophecy, but it doesn't stop there. The source also points out some really interesting overlaps in the day-to-day spiritual practices. And these aren't just ideas in a book. We're talking about real, shared traditions. For instance, take fasting. It's a huge deal in both faiths, right? Then there's charity, zakat in Islam, dana in Hinduism. Same core idea. Even the practice of animal sacrifice shows up in both histories. The argument here isn't that these are just weird coincidences. The source suggests they're like echoes of a shared spiritual DNA. So, what are we supposed to make of all this? All these parallels? What's the big takeaway? Well, that brings us to the ultimate message of the material we're looking at. The main idea, the big thesis here, is that none of this is an accident. These deep connections in belief, in prophecy, in ritual, they all seem to point to one thing, a single divine message coming from one creator. A message that was just, well, interpreted differently over the centuries, leading to two separate but deeply connected paths. And really, this is the heart of it. This isn't just some intellectual game of spot the difference. The source is making a powerful call for religious harmony. It's asking people to look past the surface-level rituals and see what it claims is a shared foundation, the worship of one single, formless creator. So we'll leave you with this to think about. We've just walked through some pretty compelling arguments for a shared origin.
Now, if we entertain that idea for a moment, that different paths can all lead to the same mountain peak, what does that change about the journey? And maybe more importantly, what does that change about how we see the other people climbing alongside us?